it's a really interesting experience for me to be here today because I feel like it's my family. I know so many people here in the crowd and so many people who just, wandering around. It's really, really great experience. Well, I was supposed to kind of bring in some sort of Jamstack in the session, and up until 7:23 in the morning, I had no idea what it's going to be, if I'm being very, very honest. But then we thought, we can do this, we can do this. So I want to share you a little story of a Big Bang redesign, but specifically what we did on Smashing over the last 3.5 years when moving from WordPress to Jamstack, and actually some of the lessons we learned, and some of the struggles we had along the way as well, and specifically some of the front-end solutions we came up with, or decisions we made, just to get to where we are today. And it was a really tough journey for us, I must say, but I'm really happy with the place where we are. Because, at some point, probably 4 years ago, we decided that it's probably a good idea to move away from this, that's very clean and beautiful and shiny and white, to something that's not as white. I would say rather red. Very red indeed, but you can always turn off the redness, just saying, because you can actually click on seriously red, and it becomes white again. I'm just saying, because I get emails about that every day. I want to explain because I think I need explanation. You need explanation. You deserve an explanation. And I think that it's a really good idea to structure it in two parts. One of them just briefly about design decisions we made and why, and where it all comes from. And why did we decide to do that Big Bang redesign in the first place? It's usually a really bad idea to have a Big Bang redesign. And then some of the, again, front-end solutions we came up with. And it all started, of course, with a problem. And the problem is kind of obvious. It's an elephant in the room. And it's been ad blockers. At the point, approximately 3.5 years ago, we had a quite significant number of visitors using ad blockers. I remember vividly, 6.5 years ago, when we did the very first test, it was only 13%. 2.5 years ago, actually 3 years ago now, it was actually 62%. And of course, we're talking about people like you, and you're a smart fox, right? You would use an ad blocker. Who uses an ad blocker? Who does not use an ad blocker? That's maybe 7 of you here. I'm just saying. And so this was a real problem for us because, of course, at the point, we kind of depended on advertising and we couldn't display advertising. And so we had a massive problem. And the problem was kind of obvious because we had 50% revenue decline every year over the last 6 years. And 66% of people at the time were using blocking ads. So this is where it's getting a bit dramatic. Oh, a bit too dramatic maybe, right? But that was really dramatic for us as well. It was like a really big deal because we didn't know what to do. And so we had, of course, diversified. We had books and other things. But from a business perspective, we wanted to be stable. Like, doesn't matter. A conference might not sell out. A book might not sell out. But you want something stable. So we ended up thinking about some sort of a membership that we wanted to build. But, of course, it had to tie in all the different things and services we provided at the time. And we had a lot of stuff, again, a lot of moving parts at the time. So we essentially needed to create a tool for the magazine, a CMS for 2,500 articles, now it's 3,000, a comments engine for 200,000 comments, an e-commerce platform to sell stuff, a subscription service, a job board, and a membership authentication login. And it had to kind of work across every kind of instance of the product, or every product that we're going to sell. So we had to build it from scratch. And that caused us to kind of come up with a team that would actually make it work. And so we had Daniel and Sarah helping us out with design and front-end. We had some exploration phase with Andrew Clark. Then we needed more front-end people. And then we needed information architecture and UX. And then we needed Cat Illustrator. You will see in a second why Cat Illustrator. He dreams in cats at this point. We also had to deal with backend. And Matthias was actually helping us out there. Sarah was helping with animation, Hayden accessibility, and these people usually don't go on stage to talk about this project, and this is just me presenting, but they all deserve to be mentioned because without them I wouldn't be able to do anything. And when we started working, it was really all about bringing in some personality into the game, because we didn't want to create something that would look like this, right? Well, which of these two possible websites are you currently designing today? Because there is one on the left and one on the right, and maybe there is a carousel, which is sometimes at the top, sometimes at the bottom, and sometimes both at the top or the bottom, because why not, right? And so we wanted to create something that had a bit more personality, specifically kind of being inspired by many, many different examples, but we wanted to be able to play. Like, when I saw this for the first time, I'm sure that many of you did as well, right? I felt like, oh, this is cute, right? And I thought, we tend to avoid making people think, and we tend to avoid making kind of interface, adding some sort of friction in our interfaces. But I felt so connected with this interface when I saw it for the very first time. And I wanted to type and retype and type over and type again just to have this kind of experience and see what's going to happen, right? And this is kind of an emotional connection that I'm sometimes missing in experiences that we see on the web. And I thought that we could pull that off. I mean, we don't have to do that, of course, but we could do something that could be a bit more personal. And even if you take something very, very boring, like a toggle, what could be more boring in the world than a toggle? Well, you can make a toggle interesting. Maybe sometimes it is a good idea to make people click twice, and 3 times, and 4 times, and 5 times, because again, adding a bit of friction so they can actually have a chance to engage with you, right? And so we started playing with these ideas very early on, and before we even designed anything, we started building blocks like this. I mean, this was kind of the end result, but we started writing copy. That was the very, very first thing that we did. We were writing these kind of blocks that you would read an article, and all of a sudden there would be this block. Would you click on this button? Who would? Well, you are not alone, right? This was one of the most clicked buttons on the entire site, right? And then I thought, okay, maybe we could do this. It's a bit more text, admittedly, but this button does something. Would you click on that button? Not so much, no. The other one works though, right? And so we added a little bit of nonsense every now and again. Like if you go and start checking out, you find this little box. Oh, this is one of the most favorite boxes that people actually click on. That's great. Sarah was designing this little animation, so when you go into checkout, we actually sometimes were slowing down everything just so people actually have an option to expose this interface because the interface was too fast. Right? So we had to actually slow down so people see this animation when they start checking out. And it all started really with kind of looking into text first, kind of building an experience from a text editor. This was one of the first mock-ups we did. Just copy, no like a bit of structure, of course, but I mean no layout, nothing of that kind. But you can even see a few primary buttons, secondary buttons, and things like that. So the very, very first thing was actually writing copy, and specifically error messages that we would be using later. And they don't make sense right now, of course, outside of the context of the page, but we kind of wanted to tell the story, and that meant that we need to build a story first, right? And then we started looking into typefaces, right, and looking into many different options, and we picked this one, Elena, for body copy, and this one, Mija, for headings, and I hate Mija. I'm sorry if you're the designer of Mija sitting here. I really don't like this typeface. Look at the A, just look at the A. But it's not about me, because when I started looking into study and how people perceive us, I always wanted to be, standing for a respectable community, magazine, something of that kind. But people were not saying things like professional, respectable, community. I mean, they were saying community, but they were also saying something else. Playful, informal, friendly, and they were saying cats. And I'm like, I don't want my destiny to be cats. That's a bit sad, actually, if you think about it. So the reason why people actually associate us with cats so much, and which is why we have 73 freaking cats walking around the page right now, as of now, and our illustrator has become a cat illustrator. It's not a joke. But mostly because it wasn't about me liking or not liking. I'm allergic against cats. I really am. Right? But the point is, well, people associated the product because we kind of highlight cats at our conferences quite a lot. And then we just started building, kind of building from little interactions, like this one, kind of starting building up the layout and all of that. But it all was like really simple prototypes, built HTML, CSS, nothing fancy there, right? Sometimes also Photoshop. And then we started, hello, Yuna. And then we started kind of looking into the mobile experience, responsive experience, designing actually tablet first, and then building mobile first. So we kind of were experimenting and looking and improving and refining. And this is how design kind of evolved over time, ending up with this red madness, right? But also having all kind of little things, signatures. This is one of them, the tilting. It's consistent everywhere. So whenever you go and sign up, whenever you see authors and so on, this is always going to be tilted. We were super lazy, so we spent quite a bit of time. I mean, I just like print style sheets. We spent a lot of time designing print style sheets, because I didn't want to have any tool that would generate invoices. So we just did it with print style sheets, for example. And the experience is very often like this, where you have this tilted thing, whatever that is, right? And then you start typing, and then it untilts. But it actually defined everything, including animations. So whenever an animation is kicking in, the animation will be happening in that, with that angle as well. So this was kind of a very important, consistent thing that hasn't become the ultimate, kind of guided us through our design decisions. And of course, we had some fun as well along the way, because I always wanted to do this in my project, right? And now I can. That's great. But we didn't, for some reason. I don't even know why. Doesn't matter, right? So kind of this is where it all came from, because we wanted to bring in some personality and cats and animations. And by the way, the red on the page comes from the face of the cat, which was just randomly picked by our illustrator 8 years ago. He wanted to have some sort of mascot for a conference. I was like, I don't know if we're going to have a second, for the first conference. I didn't know if we're going to have a second conference or whatever. Cat, dog, rabbits, I don't know. So he picked that color, and we have to use it now, forever. Yeah, you better make some, check what your designers are doing. Just saying, just saying. Now, with this out of the way, this was kind of the design part, right? And when we started looking at the front end, we had so many options. I mean, this is a really great little overview by Jason Miller that was published last year on Twitter or so, just exploring all the different options we could go for. We could go, full client side, full server side, and we had all the options. And the reason why we actually were not happy with what we had is because it was very complicated. I have to jump here to show another slide, because it would explain it better. We had all these options, not all these options, all these platforms that we were using at the time. So we're using WordPress for the magazine, we're using Shopify for the shop, we're using a quite outdated thing we built years ago on Rails for job board. We also had conferences running on Kirby, and we had to bring in membership somehow into all of this. And imagine building bridges between all of these platforms. Ideally, you would want to have something like a magazine where somebody could sign in, and they would get a discount in job board postings, and they would get like extra discounts maybe to the shop, and they would have their shipping addresses and billing addresses saved and all of that, and then they can go to conferences and check out without submitting details over and over and creating accounts over and over. So it was kind of the ultimate goal. So the membership had to fit in somehow, right? And the problem there was really we didn't know what to do for a while. And specifically, we were not even thinking about things that matter most. Like in the beginning, it would have been a very good idea to think about performance budgets. But at the point, we were just looking into all frameworks that would be actually useful to use, that would be able to build things with. And we kind of could have used that because it actually bites us later. Right? So actually thinking about performance budgets early on is a really, really good idea, which we did not, which we're actually doing only now. Right? Now, what did we decide to do? Now, of course, you know the answer, because we ended up kind of looking into Jamstack, and it has a reason. And the reason for that is because we didn't want to rely on heavy frameworks to do the heavy lifting for us. Obviously, you want the leanest, you want the most optimal, and all of that. And we were using WordPress for a while, and we were happy. I mean, WordPress was fine. They didn't break anything for us. The performance wasn't as good as we wanted. We had all kind of issues with caching plugins. We had all kind of issues with server, and that was the maintenance was also a bit hacky for us and expensive. And so we didn't really hate WordPress, but we never even thought that we could actually move to something else. So in the very start, we were exploring this idea: what if we just bake everything into WordPress? Oh, I see a little bit of going on here in the area, right? And then it was really interesting because I met Matt in 2011 or even 12. And we invited him to speak, and he was speaking at the Smashing conference about Jamstack. And it was San Francisco 2016. Matt, you here? 15, 16, something. And then he was mentioning this idea of Jamstack. And I thought it could be interesting. And then we started talking, and we started talking a bit more. And over time, we kind of evolved this paradigm of what the new stack could be for us when we're actually building on Smashing and the Smashing architecture as a result of having a Git-centric workflow where you have a nice CDN, you have continuous delivery, versioning, all of these fancy things that you're familiar with, right? We ended up having a quite straightforward answer to what we could do to make it all work. It just would mean to build all of the stuff from scratch, right? So you would have we decided on Hugo and Webpack, not because it was like a conscious move, let's Hugo against everything else. We just picked one that worked well, right? And then we'd use tons of microservices for all the dynamic parts that we were kind of having across the site. And then we were using Netlify CMS to actually publish content, right? And as a result, we had to build quite a lot, and it was like 2.5 years project, actually. That was a lot of time, where we had to build, with Netlify, of course, an open source ecosystem with the CMS and the GoTel for comments and GoTrue for authentication and GoCommerce for the commerce and a couple of moving parts here and there. And of course, we had to pick a framework. So we did not choose React. We went with Preact, and we actually made it. We built all of it out with Preact. And it's still working on Preact. However, we are moving to React now. And it's not because we don't like Preact or the performance is bad or anything. It's just the community, of course, is much, much, much bigger than React. It seems like it's moving forward much, much, much faster. And many things that we could have done out of the box, we cannot do with Preact now. So this is why our developer, main front-end developer, decided to move to Preact. But at the same time, one important thing that was really critical is to have the entire single-page application progressively enhanced. That was like the very first clear objective. From the very start, everything has to be fully accessible, even without JavaScript altogether. And it doesn't mean that I'm not one of those people who say, protect people who turn off JavaScript. It's not about that. It's just about content being accessible to whatever happens. If your JavaScript is broken or something is going on in the network and you can't access content, you can't access the file, you should still be able to get the content out. And so we started looking into strategies, right? And for performance, it was quite obvious. I mean, all the things that you probably know as well, the critical CSS, the little details for web font loading and things like that, but also service workers to be able to pre-cache some routes or to be able to pre-cache or cache assets properly, and the same goes for pages. For responsive images, we chose to go with Cloudinary. We're still using Cloudinary. So we can serve WebP to browsers that support WebP, and we can be really, really strict about what we're serving to smaller screens and so on. We spent a lot of time on web font loading. A lot. Probably too much. I think I couldn't see glyphs anymore at some point because we're doing all this preloading and testing this and testing that and subsets. And that was madness, and I will actually dive into it in a second as well, right? But that was a really important part because we saw reflow happening quite a lot initially. And then for live search, we're using Algolia. But of course, if Algolia is down, for example, we still wanted to provide some sort of reasonable search experience. Anybody familiar with Algolia? Right, search experience. So we ended up saying, okay, if Algolia script doesn't run, well, by default, the form is going to submit to Google. And so the search fallback is Google, and then the more optimized experience, the progressively enhanced experience, will be the Algolia live search. Critical CSS was another story. Of course, we have moved to HTTPS already at this point, and HTTP2 3 years ago, right? So that was a big deal for us, just because imagine 3,000 articles, tons of mixed content, poor editors. We took everybody, the entire team had to go for articles and fix freaking mixed content warnings because there were so many of them. Luckily we were able to track them, right? And so that was a big, big move. It was very hard. And then, of course, the same thing kind of with critical CSS, because we started looking into how we can optimize for performance. And very early on, I thought, I don't trust all these tools, like the critical and all the others. I'll do it myself, right? So we went through seven, I think, different templates and collected all the critical CSS for the 1,200 pixels height across breakpoints, right? And pushed it out. Our developer hated me because, everything had to go through me later. So it's only now, actually, in this year, when we automated everything using Adios minus critical, right? And also rendering the preview using Puppeteer, by the way. So that's pretty cool. And then now the next step would be is actually to move this critical CSS file to HTTP to server push. So whenever you request index.html, you're getting critical CSS out of the box. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So that's kind of a really important part as well. Third-party scripts. Oh, we had advertising scripts from legacy from WordPress times, and we had to rewrite them. So we were using OpenX for a while. Then we were using our custom other script. And then as a result, also 1 year ago, we moved to a custom implementation that uses intersection observer to actually load scripts when we need them and track them when people click on them. Right? That was much, much, much faster. So that was nice. But again, once we talk about strategies, we also have to think about fallbacks. Right? For example, obviously, what happens if the connection is slow or things like that? Again, for live search, we have Google search being the fallback. Obviously, when we need to retrieve comments, we are going to cache them, but then the problem is, what if you submit the comment, and then, of course, we need to have a build process, and then it will take a while until this comment goes live. So I'm kind of looking into that and kind of played a little bit with caching to make it work. For network, service workers, obviously, legacy browsers, accessible experience. We're not going to serve decent web fonts to IE9, for example. It can live with Arial, I'm sure, right? And then print style sheet was doing a lot of heavy lifting for us to generate PDFs or print or pretty much things that we could offload, right? And checkout relies on JavaScript. So at this point, we're using Stripe, and we couldn't make it work, at least for now, without JavaScript. Now, this is what it looks like in the back. Let me just show you, dive in the code. So this is difficult because I can see. Right? So this is what's happening behind the scenes. Essentially, hold on. Essentially, I'll have to make it a bit larger. Oh, this is a cookie bot I was fixing, sorry. That's not what I wanted to show. So let me hold back and go back, please. Can I go back? No. Okay, that's not what I want. Hold on. Right. So here we go. So essentially, every single comment, every single article, every single job board posting, every single conference speaker, every single workshop speaker, every single webinar, every single ebook is basically a markdown file. Right, so what's happening here behind the scenes is if we look in our pages, or let's say if we look into events, right? So everything is kind of structured. And so this is everything that we're preparing. And then, of course, there is a build process in place, which essentially takes what we have. It creates critical CSS for every single template that we're using. It plugs it in, and then we ship it right to CDN, straight again using Netlify at this point, right? And of course, when I look into, let's say, JavaScript, not this kind of scripts. Hold on. Site, where's my source? Components. Behind the scenes, it's all kind of happening again with Preact at this point, right? And it works, it's all fine, and we're kind of happy. But at the same time, one thing that could have been better is performance. So performance is okay. I mean, if we look into where we are right now, we could be doing better. So right now, if I look at 3G, and this is what we're testing most, so we would actually throttle the, memory, of course, goes down, and then, of course, we would throttle to 3G. Yeah, it takes 2.5 seconds. That's not bad on 3G, but it's not great either. And if we look into web page tests, let's say on a stable connection, most of the time it's around the start render, which is not necessarily the best metric now, and the first interactive, 1 second, 1.3 seconds, right? Obviously, we want to be under 1,000, not seconds, under 1 second, under 1,000 speed index, but it's still decent, because I remember times with WordPress when things used to be much worse. I remember, I never forget. I'm like an elephant, I never forget, right? So there is still quite a bit of work to do, but behind the scenes, what's happening is, as we're using Netlify CMS, actually we're starting using GitHub more anyway. Every single article that's being deployed in the end will go through this routine where you're going to add a new webinar and things like that. Here generated by Smashing CMS bot, right? So it opens up a pull request, and then somebody, an editor, will check if it's okay or not. We'll edit it maybe, again, using GitHub as well. Everybody on the team is kind of familiar with GitHub at this point. And then would merge, and then it goes maybe first to staging, and then goes to master. Regular thing, nothing fancy about that at this point, right? And of course, we need to organize it somehow. So we organize it using Notion. Anybody using Notion? Yeah. So Notion is very, very nice. And so what we decided to do, it was a very conscious decision as well, try to avoid emails as much as possible. So even to the point where we wanted to, I mean, I wanted, Amanda doesn't know, I wanted to disallow everybody to send emails to each other. Because whenever you send an email to somebody, it ends up being locked in the conversation between two people and everybody else doesn't know about it. So whenever it comes to a project, when your team is working on, the communication has to be public. Right? And for that, we're using Notion for pretty much everything, from conferences to visual illustrations to membership, pretty much everything. And this is a dev board, moving cards around. Of course, you're familiar with all of that as well. And then for communication for the team, we're using Slack at this point. Right? So all of that, when Matt started working, just before when we started, brought us to significant improvement. When we moved from WordPress to Netlify, we got 6 times faster. And we used to be faster than we are now, because we had to bring in more features and all of that. So I remember vividly when we had a start render time, on average, approximately 700 milliseconds. And we lost half a second along the way now, so we have to get back, find our way back. And so, oh yeah, this is also one of them, one of those screenshots, the very first early screenshots, just by moving to this different stack, which was incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so we ended up actually really exploring what we can do next. Now, we spent a lot of time trying to improve the experience for developers, because over time, more and more people were actually involved. Some were freelancing, some were actually working on the project all the time. And one of the very useful things, very simple but useful things, which I think all of you are using as well, was namespacing. So many of you will be familiar with Smacks. Many of you will be maybe using BAM. We ended up using BAMX, BAMSMACSEX, whatever they want to call it. So it's a combination, really. But it was really useful to have these prefixes for layout, for general structural objects, for specific components, like let's say carousel, accordion, and other things, right? Theming, right? The same thing here. Scoped content, something that's coming from a CMS if author is working on it. Stateful namespaces that describe a behavior, utilities, JavaScript hooks, and so on. So in the beginning, we were using them. Then we had more and more developers coming, and then it's a little bit messy right now, so we're refactoring, of course. But then I really like this idea because you can write code in such a predictable way. Because before you start coding, and this is very kind of important for every project that I'm involved with, because we also do consultancy and other things. Before you even start coding, or before somebody starts designing, designers and developers get together on a table and they discuss components and they give them names with prefixes. That's so cool, because whenever the designer starts designing in Photoshop or in Sketch or whatever it is they're using, they're already thinking these components, and they're giving even to layers that they're using or to symbols that they're using. They're giving proper names that developers can then use one-to-one mapping in the code. That's incredibly powerful. And then we also talk about the family of components, what we potentially need. That's really, really cool. So we actually always start thinking about components first. And as Harry Roberts wrote in his article a while back, you can even highlight types of namespaces once you have them. So you can say, show me all components on that page related to theming, right? Or show me all components on that page that are kind of structural objects. That if I need to refactor something, I can actually see what's going on, right? Just having this kind of utilities or this kind of classes really, really helps. And even better, because we are refactoring right now, what we're doing now is using RF classes, where essentially the idea is, well, I would love to see if something has been refactored yet or not, right? So whenever a component has been refactored, I'm adding RF prefix to it, so you can do the same thing, and you can highlight everything that's been refactored, and as long as it's not refactored, you can go to a page and see, okay, we have to work on that because this is not refactored yet, particularly on a landing page, let's say. And even further than that, we're looking into the option of using responsive suffixes, where maybe for class names, you could use something like this, right? So you have a component which is very clear what it is, image list at a small screen, and then as you go to a larger screen, it becomes a carousel. You don't even have to go into debug or in DevTools and explore what's happening and do the crazy thing that only we do, resizing, right? Because you can actually see that there are only 2 states. There is image list on a small screen, and there is a carousel on a large screen. And of course, in your post-CSS plugin, you'll probably have to escape the add symbol automatically. But this is a very nice reading experience. I really, really like this. Right? 34 seconds. Okay. Well, I will share the slides of all the other things that we were doing as well. But I think one hard lesson we learned from all of this is that it doesn't matter what you do, you will never get things right. We did a lot of stuff kind of in the back. Many of the things that we changed even this year are not really visible to everybody. There's just a lot of little things here and there. So like scheduled publishing. We had to automate webinars and smashing TV management, automate critical CSS. We built an API layer between all integration parties that we're using, like Stripe, SendGrid, and others. Add-on panel management. Building time enhancement, of course, because we deploy every time we have a significant change. Yeah, we kind of wanted to be faster, so we worked a lot on that. Automated search indexing within the build pipeline. And then only last year, actually added Webpack and subscription management, because we have a printed magazine coming up, so it has to be managed too. It's has become a really complicated, massive thing. It's not a blog, really. It's more like a platform. And then right now, still waiting for the pull request to go live, migration to React Stack with Redux and Formic. And actually, it's right here. Let's see. Do you feel like I should merge it, very much like Matt did? Let's see. Let's see. Where is this beauty? I know I'm almost finished. I'm almost finished. Aha! Here we go. So do you want me to click this button? I don't want to click this button. No way. But yeah, that's been an interesting journey for us. Yeah. No. I'm going to close it just before something happens. So, okay, so just wrapping up, there is still quite a bit of stuff to do. All right, so we haven't moved to using broadly for compression yet. We have to reduce the impact of JavaScript. On very slow devices, it is noticeable. There is a very noticeable first input delay. That's something we have to work on. We haven't pushed critical CSS to the server yet, server push. We actually wanted to streamline checkout altogether. Anybody familiar with payment request API? Right, so this is actually also something we're switching to as of now, to actually make the subscriptions or checkout faster. More stuff. This is all just us trying to do something like automated regression testing. There's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. But, and that's an important part, it doesn't matter what you do, you never get it right. And this has been the story of my life for the last 4 years now, because every year, there is something that you feel like, oh, I can do this. You realize, yeah, you can, but not as you expected it to be. Right? And so you can never make things perfect, but maybe we shouldn't actually expect perfectness. Maybe we could be perfectly fine with things being in progress. I'm happy with that as well. So welcome to my world. This is like 40 seconds or so. It's very sad. It's very sad. But this is the state of front-end 2019. So huge thanks to Parallel Studio for the video. And with that in mind, cats, more cats, and meow. Thank you.